Here we go. Okay, so we have a class on codes. First question is, has everybody here heard about the idea of hidden codes in the Torah? Yes? No?
Yes.
Let me flip it around. Has anyone not heard? Has anyone not heard? All right, you soon will. Let's start out like this. Why would even think to start to look for codes in the ancient Hebrew text? Like, I would not open up today's copy of Jerusalem Post and start to look for codes. I'd not open up today's copy of New York Times and start to look for hidden. Why would even think to look for hidden codes in the ancient Hebrew text? Does anyone have any idea why do such a thing? Even think of it. Look, I think the answer is, if it's true, the Torah is quote unquote the word of God, I'd expect to see a little bit more depth in this book than just a bunch of interesting stories and a bunch of laws, but it goes so much further. If you guys would give me, I don't know, 5 minutes, we have a particular room in this building, and in this room we have blueprints. We have blueprints of every single inch of this building. So I'd get the blueprint, this is the room, I'd stick up here on the stender, and I look and it says door, door, window, meaning this room is encoded in detail in this piece of paper I call a blueprint. Question, what came first, the blueprint or the room? Yeah, this is why I'd start to look for codes in the Torah. The Kabbalistic view of the Torah is possibly unlike you heard before. It says in the Zohar, God lived in the Torah and created the world. In other words, we understand Torah is great. That's why I start to look for something a bit deeper, but it goes so much further. 300 years ago, the Vilna Gaon said the following, famous Kabbalist. The rule is that all that was, is, and will be, until the end of time, is including the Torah from Bereshit, which is the beginning of the book, to the Equidistant, which is the end of the book. Get this. Not merely in a general sense, but including the details of every species, each person individually, and the most minute details of everything that happened to him from the day of his birth to the day of his death. Let's just claim it. Everything you ever did, will do, are doing, is encoded in this book. And not everyone in this room, everyone on this planet, and if that's not wild enough, everyone throughout all of history is included in detail in the Torah. Guys, I would like to say that's probably one of the wildest claims about any book in history. I'd like to say there's a little bit of room for skepticism here, but let's keep moving on. 500 years ago, Moshe Cordova, one of the great Kabbalists of Safat during the Golden Period, he wrote the following. The secrets of our Holy Torah are revealed through knowledge of combinations, numerology, playing with numbers, gematrias, switching letters, first and last letters, changing letters, first and last verses, skipping of letters, which we call Bilogotiyot, and letter combinations. In other words, these are all the ways all this information is jammed into the book. We're going to come back to it, but first let's finish the paragraph. Because of the great hiddenness, we don't have the ability to fully comprehend them further, to see different angles to these methods infinite without a limit, and this, the Torah says its measure is longer than the world. Example, Bilogotiyot, skipping of letters. If I would take the Torah and just make one long line of letters from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, and then I'd skip every 50 letters, every 50th letter, and then I'd take those letters out, put them together, there's a message there. If I look at the same letters in the opposite direction, there's nothing much of there. If I look at every 1,859th letter, there's a message. All we have to do is apply these methods and see what comes out. You guys with me? Yeah. Okay, any questions, please ask. Off we go. In the 1940s, there was a very, very famous Rebbe called Rabbi Weissman. He was famous for all the kids he saved from the Holocaust. He heard about this and he said, you know what, I'm going to try it out. So what did he do? He decided to look for something very, very simple. He decided to look for the code Torah in the Torah. And he actually found something quite interesting. Right at the beginning of the book, you start with the first Tuf, the first T, so to say. He said 50 letters, Vav, 50 letters, Aish, 50 letters, Hey. Unbelievable. At the beginning of the Torah, so with the first T, the first Tuf, and a 50-letter skip, you have Torah encoded in the Torah. Unbelievable. Question. Does this prove there are codes in the Torah? Yes or no?
Yes.
No. Why not?
Not that significant.
Say again?
It's not that significant.
Yeah, look, does anyone know how many letters are in the Torah? How many letters? There's 304,805 letters. Is it surprising somewhere in this book, there's some sort of skip? I'm going to find the word Torah. What do you guys say? Well, I'm sure I'm going to find it. I'll probably find it a bunch of times. Okay, I'll show you something else we found. One of the greatest sages that ever lived. You guys know the Rambam, yeah? So they noted in a certain sentence in the book, there are 4 consecutive words, and you take the first letter from each of those words, But Makabe Ertzman's rhyme, I'll multiply my wonders, the land of Egypt. Take the first letters of those 4 consecutive words, put them together, you have Rambam. Unbelievable. Is this code? Is this proof there's code in the Torah? Yes or no? Yeah, there's like 80,000 words in this book. Is it surprising somewhere I'm going to find 4 words, take the first letters, put them together, it seems like that. But what's really interesting is later when they finally had computers, they scanned the entire Torah, and in fact, they found this is the only place it happens. So we can ask ourselves, maybe the area here has something to do with the name. Does anyone know where the Rambam spent most of his life? Egypt. So this whole background here is talking about Egypt, and a little bit further down, it's talking about the very first Pesach offering in human history, just before we got thrown out of the country. And it said, Arba Eser Yom B'Chodesh Hazeh, on the 14th day of that month, we're supposed to do this Pesach offering. In Hebrew, what month does Pesach come out in?
First
Nisan. So the 14th of Nisan is Rambam's birthday. So now we hold it. We have the Rambam. We have the whole background Egypt where we spend most of our life, and we have his birthday. And then he said, you know what? I'm going to look for the Rambam's most famous work, possibly the most famous work in all the Jewish literature, the Mishnah Torah. You guys know the Mishnah Torah, yeah? What's the subject of the Mishnah Torah? How many mitzvahs do we have? 613. So he said they go into detail, tremendous detail. Good. So he said, I'm going to look for the Mishnah Torah. Why not? So he found something very interesting. He found right over Rambam, the green that showed up, at a 50-letter skip, you have Mishnah. And then a little further down, way over here, again, 50-letter skip, you found Torah. So now we hold it. We have the Rambam. We have the background of Egypt. We have his birthday. And we have the most famous book he ever wrote, the Mishnah Torah. But there's something that bothered Reb Weissmantel about what I just showed you here. Is anyone bothered by something here? Anybody? Yeah.
Like the skips are arbitrary. Like why you skip all the way down the line till you then find.
Yeah. Look, what's the book called? The book's called the Mishnah Torah. It's not called Mishnah Torah. It's called Mishnah Torah. Why did it skip the distance between the Mishnah and Torah? So I got a little bit curious, and decided to count the letters between Mishnah and Torah. Anyone want to guess how many letters it came up with?
14.
What just happened to be
Wow.
6? Now, you guys got to realize, hold on, Rev Weissmantel was a Rebbe. He was a Rosh Yeshiva. He wasn't a mathematician. He wasn't a statistician. But what he actually did is he wrote a book called Torah Tamid, talking about the customs of his yeshiva. It's very interesting. I have a copy in my shelf at home. And he also included all the stuff that he found. But what happened was, in the 1970s, 2 mathematicians from Hebrew U, just up on Mount Scopus, got a hold of the book, and they were blown away. But before I go any further, I want to introduce you to one of those professors, Professor Eliyahu Rips. Let me see if we can get him down. Professor Rips, how are you doing?
In 1968, when Russian tanks invaded Czechoslovakia, Eliyahu Rips was a gifted young student of mathematics in Latvia. As demonstrators around the world took to the streets, Rips made an extraordinary personal protest.
To a public square in Riga, put a gasoline on himself and burned himself to call the attention of the world to this evil act of the Soviet Empire.
Rips was sent to a Soviet psychiatric hospital, a common punishment for political protesters. There, with time on his hands, he worked on a mathematical problem that was to amaze the academic world.
When Rips was in prison, he had the idea to work on a famous unsolved problem called the dimension subgroup conjecture. This had been a problem which Westerners thought they had solved. In fact, there was a published paper in one of the best journals by very esteemed famous people claiming to have solved this conjecture and given a proof of it. When he was in detention, He had no paper to work with, so one of the guys actually got him some pencil and a little piece of toilet paper. Using only this, he was able to refute the greatest minds in the West. He showed this conjecture was actually false, even though all the experts thought they had proven it was true. Let's turn the subject on its head.
After 2 years, Rips was released and allowed to emigrate. He arrived in Israel with a reputation as a man of unshakable integrity and as a brilliant theoretical mathematician.
Rips is an extraordinary mathematician. I mean, not just an outstanding mathematician. There are many outstanding mathematicians, but he's a world star. I mean, Oxford and Cambridge would be delighted to have Rips as a professor.
It was now in Israel that Rips was introduced to the world of the Bible codes. One well-known form of code found in the Bible is called a skip code.
Skip codes involve a different way to read a text than we normally do. Usually we read one letter at a time, the first letter, the second letter, and the third letter, and so forth. But with a skip code, we might start with the third letter, and then skip ahead 10 to the 13th letter, and then to the 23rd letter, and so forth. And maybe that would spell out a new word, jumping 10 letters at a time. Here's an example. There's a sentence here that says, my way of showing a skip code is encrypted in the very words I put down here. Let's take the first letter and jump every 14 and make that red. It's very hard to read as it's written here. We see the letter M, A, R, Y, H, A, D. It's not so legible. So to make it look nicer and understand it better, what we usually do is we break the line before each red letter. So now, we have each line starting with a red letter, and now the red letters are in a column and it's very easy to read. Mary had a little lamb.
One of these simple codes particularly caught Rips's imagination. It appears at the beginning of the Torah, the Jewish Bible, which is made up of the first 5 books of the Old Testament.
When we start with the first T in the book of Genesis, in fact it comes in the first verse. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Starting with the first T and taking every 50 letters, the word Torah appears.
Exactly the same pattern appeared in the second book of the Torah, Exodus. Again, starting with the first T and skipping 49 letters. The word Torah appears.
It was enough to me to be most intrigued, to think something very interesting might go on.
Rips began to employ a computer program that could search for skip codes like this at enormous speed. He could have had no idea where it would lead.
Thank you, Professor. Okay, guys, so Professor Rips and his colleagues, they saw what the waste metal found. They were blown away, but both these guys were religious. They didn't want to take it too fast, so they decided to check it out with a colleague of theirs, a fellow named Professor Daniel Michelson, Russian-born mathematician. The guy was an atheist. He kept it. Professor Michelson sat down with a book and he calculated for about 3 days. 3 days later, he came back to Professor Rips. He says, I'm convinced this is not an accident. He said, come on, the chances are too slim. So Professor Rips got excited and said, so you have to admit, my Russian-born atheist mathematician friend, that God put codes in the Torah. Professor Michelson said, that's not exactly what he had in mind. He said, all right, so there's codes in the Torah, but in his mind, he put them in there. Human beings, yeah. He said, come on, we were running around the desert for 40 years with Moses. We had a lot of time in our hands. We can take the Torah, switch it on letters, words, sentences. We can turn the Torah into one gigantic crossword puzzle. He said no, 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 and no. Meaning, he said, if you want to call this scientific, what's the very first rule that would have been broken here for calling this scientific? Meaning, if you're doing a scientific experiment, what's the very first thing you have to have? Anyone know? Hypothesis. Come up with a tentative assumption, looks for ways to test it. If it stands, it stands. If it falls, it falls. Here, Rabbi Weissman was looking around for stuff. Okay, what he found was interesting, but it wasn't scientific. So what they do, decided to step it up. They went to standard work of Jewish law, you guys know the Mishnah Berurah, and the introduction to Hanukkah, they took out all the key words, and now with a list of pre-selected words from the introduction to Hanukkah, they approached the Torah. And the first thing they said is, computer, find me the word Hanukkah, first one on the list. They skipped every one letter, every two letters, every three letters, every four letters. Now, in these days, and back in those days, computers were so much slower than today. They wanted to do it in one lifetime instead of 20. So they only looked in the book of Rashis, Genesis, which is fair, because we have a tradition, all the Torah is jammed into that book. But finally, the computer found Hanukkah. Right over here, at a minus 626 skip, meaning the word goes backwards, which is forward, which is fine. We have a tradition that goes backwards, they go forward. And between each of these letters, there's 262 letters. Now I want to blow this up so we can see what we're talking about. So just keep in mind, if we're looking at Torah with letters this big, we're looking at a giant movie screen. I'd have to break through the wall, break through the wall, break through the ceiling, break through the floor. And right here on the screen, we have Hanukkah. Hanukkah, again, at a minus 262 skip. Between each of these letters, there's 262 letters. Now, question, is that proof that goes in the Torah? Yes or no?
No.
No. You can find it somewhere, maybe a lot of places in the Torah. But now that we have the screen frozen, what gets interesting is when we start to look for the other words. The next word was Hashmonaim. Who were the Hashmonaim? Anyone know?
Maccabees.
Yeah, this company started the revolt. And again, even with this giant movie screen right here in such close proximity, I would like to say, chances of this happening in such close proximity is probably me going up in a helicopter 1,000 feet on a windy day over Jerusalem. I get a paper airplane, I throw it out, it goes to Yad Vashem, the string bridge advances to Jerusalem, goes off the road, and lands on the roof of the Aish Torah, which is cool, but I'll land somewhere. But then I go up in another helicopter, I face the other direction, another paper airplane, it goes to Mount Scopus, Mount of Olives, a couple turns the Dome of the Rock, and lands on the roof of Aish Torah. That's starting to get strange. The next word they found was Maccabees, not the beer, it was Maccabees. That's a group voting against the Greeks. So we have three paper airplanes going all over Jerusalem. They all land in the roof of Aish Torah. In one case, the nose of one plane lands on the wing of another. Also, Yehuda. Yehuda was a brilliant tactician. He was leading the guerrilla fighting against the Greeks. Unfortunately, he didn't live to see the fruits of the labor. Yeah.
Do the patterns it makes on here have any significance? Like, that might be a dollar.
Yeah, everything has significance, but in our generation, even the numbers, there's nobody that can take it that far. Okay, next, they found Yvonne. Who's Yvonne? Greece. So we have 5 paper airplanes going over Jerusalem, landing on the roof of Aish Torah, and in 2 cases, those who went from one way to another, and finally they found Chet Yamim 8 days, which we know is a miracle of Hanukkah. Sort of looks like this. I'll show you another thing they found. You guys know diabetes. And you know how to say diabetes in Hebrew, and it's not diabetes. No. How do you say diabetes? Diabetes in Hebrew. How do you say sugar? Sukarat diabetes. So they said, computer, find me the term sukarat diabetes. Computer said, no doubt, no problem, got it right here. Sukarat at a minus 6 skip. Does anyone know what organ in diabetes affects? The pancreas. I do not say pancreas in Hebrew. Lablab. They found that here, late in the bond, lablab. What is the drug that they use to keep things balanced? Insulin. They said, computer, find me insulin. Here, skipped every 1 letter, 2 letters, 3 letters. Finally, a giant skip, they found inside a giant skip of 3,378 letters, but completely unique. The computer could find no other incidence of insulin anywhere in the Torah, period. At this point, Professor Daniel Michelson, remember Russian-born atheist? The guy was blown away. He said, you guys get proof, they're quotes in the Torah. We get this published. So what they did, they decided to go to probably the most prestigious journal in the world of statistics, the Journal of Statistical Science. So they went to the journal, They showed him what they found, and the journal said cute. We do not accept. We don't accept. Know it. There's actually a very easy way to, let's be polite here, finagle, mess around in something like this. Everybody does how, but you have to keep it so simple. Look, all you do is look for like, I don't know, 1 million diseases. And the one that works out, diabetes, insulin, pancreas, what? But the 999,909 that didn't work out, just sweep them to the rug. Don't tell anyone. Come on, 1 in a million. Something's going to happen somewhere. You guys with me? Mm-hmm. So they said to the magazine, look, just to prove the point, why don't we do the experiment together? We predict, why not? We're going to find the name of famous rabbis in the Torah. How do you guys want us to look for them? So the magazine said, okay, you look for these rabbis, but not just one rabbi. Look for a whole list of rabbi and look at some sort of important piece of information connected to each of their names. So the professor said, okay, look, we'll find these rabbis, why not? And in close conjunction with names, we'll find the dates of their death, Yortzeit dates, Yortzeit date. So the magazine said, go for it. What they do, they went to a standard Hebrew encyclopedia. Any rabbi that had 4 or more columns of information, they called him quote unquote a famous rabbi, pulled out the names, pulled out the dates of death. They came up with a list of 34 names. They ran the experiment, they agreed on the formula, and I got to tell you the results were like astounding. I'll give you an example. One of the rabbis, the Marshal, so over here they found this name, Marshal, in the 229 step, and between each of these letters, there's 220 letters. Is that what they're close in the Torah? No. They find his name somewhere at some sort of sketch. But then they looked for the date of his death. And they found it right above his name, the base piece of that, and his icing on the cake. They also found his first name, Shlomo, and the year of his death. But in an experiment like this, you have to figure out what is the linear distance between the date of his death and his name. And it came out, it was 7.21 letters apart, which in the world of statistics, for a sample like this, would completely blow away. Now, to be fair, some of the rabbis and the dates of their death didn't come out so close. Some came out 10, 20, 60, didn't look close at all. But by and large, it was so successful, the magazine was truly blown away and said, okay, we'll publish you guys. What happened? 2 weeks later, professors get a letter. Mail used to work in those days. The letter basically said, sorry, we're not publishing. The professors said, well, what's the problem? And the magazine said, too controversial for the public. The professors hit the road. They said, hold on. If there's something wrong with the math for it, whatever, okay, but you can't not publish it because you don't like the results. That's not fair. And the magazine said, excuse me, you want us, again, probably the most prestigious journal in statistics in the world, to publish an experiment saying God put codes in the Torah. If someone finds a crack in what you're doing, will become the laughing stock of the scientific world. But they were trying to be fair. They said, tell you what, if you guys can get the #1 statistician in the world to approve of what you're doing, we'll publish. So the professor said, great. And they said Professor Percy Diakonis of Stanford University. So what they do is, they made an appointment with Professor Diakonis, and before they actually went to meet him, they did a bit of homework because they wanted to see who they're about to come up against. And they found 3 interesting things about this guy. Number 1, yes, by and large, he is considered by almost everyone the #1 in the world of statistics. Number 2, this guy has literally published thousands and thousands of papers on science and statistics. And number 3, he is a founding member and a contributing editor to the American Skeptics Association. You say you have ESP, Professor Percy Diakonis proof, you're wrong. You say you saw a flying saucer, Professor Percy Diakonis will prove you're wrong. He's good at it, he loves it, that's his hobby. So they went to see him, he showed what they did, and he said, cute. Look, I'm sure there's an easy way to solve this. Look, computers don't have any agenda. If they find codes in the Bible, they're going to find them anywhere. All I want you guys to do is the following. Go back to Jerusalem. I want you to take a copy of War and Peace, Hebrew translation, cut it down the same size as the Bible, run the exact same experiment. And they said, fair enough. They came back to Jerusalem, got War and Peace, cut it the same size as the Bible, ran the experiment. There was nothing of any statistical significance. They called him and said, now what? And he said, yeah, let's try Moby Dick. They got a copy of Moby Dick, Hebrew translation, ran the experiment, nothing. And then he said that maybe it's translating novels versus Hebrew novels. Just take a bunch of Hebrew novels, run the experiment, which they did, nothing of any statistical significance. And then he said maybe it's ancient Hebrew versus modern Hebrew. Yeah, let's take some ancient Hebrew text, run the experiment, which they did. Again, nothing of any statistical significance. He had a bunch more ideas, and finally, it was like 17 experiments, 16, 17. And he had another idea, and at this point the professor said, Professor Diaconis, with all due respect, but he's gone on forever, would you please tell us now in writing, before we go any further, how many experiments will it take before you get permission for publication? So he said, okay, if you guys can run 1 million experiments, find nothing of any statistical significance, I'll give you a letter of approval. 1 million. What happened? These guys came back to Jerusalem, and from 1990 to the middle of 1994, 4.5 years, they had a computer running 24 hours a day. Running through one experiment and another and another and another. Middle of 1994, the computer stopped. It correlated all the data. It had run through 1 million experiments. Nothing of any statistical significance.
On what book?
What's that? On the Bible. There are different permutations of it. They agreed to this. There's no problem. Just what you do is you come up with monkey tests and you give each one a score and try to figure out how it compares to the real one. We can talk about
the
that.
New Testament or the whole?
No, the Bible, 5 books of Moses. So what happened was they went back to Professor Diaconis, showed him what they did. He took random samples, sent out to his friends. They checked these guys out really good. He couldn't see any funny business, and finally he gave him a letter of approval for publication. With this letter, they went back to the magazine. The magazine was shocked, didn't expect to see it. He said, okay, but there's one more thing we need from you guys. We want to know what's the statistical confidence level of this experiment, meaning what's the chance that you got lucky? Explain. If you're doing a general scientific paper, now there's specific ways to do this, Monte Carlo method, there's other methods. You have to show 1 in 20 chances you got strong, worthy publication. If you're doing life and death experiments, medical issues, the bar goes up. 1 in 50 chance you just got lucky, strong, worthy publication. What do they want for the rabbi's experiment? 1 in 20, not 1 in 50. What do they want? He said, for you guys, we want 1 in 80,000. You just got lucky. I guarantee you'll find no scientist anywhere in the world that ever did a bar like this. It's unheard of. But again, it was a very extraordinary experiment, so they had to take extraordinary precautionary measures. So the magazine itself, if I remember right, did the experiment. And what it turned out, statistical confidence level, the chance you just got lucky. It wasn't 1 in 20, 1 in 50, not even 1 in 1,000. The chance you got lucky was 1 in 62,500. The magazine fainted, but this was enough to get the experiment published. And what happened was in 1999, Statistical Science, probably the premier journal in statistics in the world, they had an article, experiment, Equidistant Letter Sequences in the book of Genesis. You guys got to know when this came out, it made a bomb in the scientific world. Any university, anywhere in the world that had a Department of Statistics, they wanted a copy of the experiment. The FBI wanted a copy of the experiment. The CIA wanted a copy of the experiment. There was a rabbi twice on CNN arguing with scientists and mathematicians over, you have no idea what a ruckus it caused. And what happened was, 2 years later, they came back to the professors and said, we figured you guys out. We have found 5 fatal errors in your experiment. 5 fatal errors. So, excuse me. 2 of the ways you spelled 2 of the rabbis' names, and that's spelled like that. And 2 of the days, you said 2 of the other rabbis died. They didn't die in those days. What they do, they paid a guy to fly all over Europe, go to cemeteries and take pictures of tombstones. And they said there's a problem in one of the formulas. We are publishing an article in the same magazine saying we found 5 fatal errors in your experiment. If you read between the lines, they're basically saying you guys manipulated to make it come out so sweet. The professors were taken back. They said, hold on, let's be fair here. Look, you guys got the tombstones, we have the encyclopedia. Okay, you can't argue with tombstones. And the formula is just an innocent mistake. If you want to be fair, why don't you do the following? Let's touch up the formula, fix it up, innocent mistake, change the 2 names into 2 dates they are on the tombstones. Let's run the thing again and see what happens. And they said, fair enough. So that's what they did. They changed the 2 names and the dates as on the tombstones, touched up the formula, and ran statistical confidence level again. Now, what was the chances it got lucky? It wasn't 1 in 20, not 1 in 50, not 1 in 1,000. It's embarrassing, but don't jump. I'll try to explain. It really wasn't 1 in 62,500. Now what it turned out to be? 1 in 1,684,000 chances it got lucky. They improved the formula and the data, and the results just shot through the roof. I said it was embarrassing. I didn't say the hoop. Now what happened was, at this point, some of the critics started doing their own codes research, but others went on such a rampage. A few years later, in the magazine, they published an article trying to show how they thought things were manipulated. They call it wiggle room. Meaning, there's different ways to spell the rabbis' names and look for the dates, so you can pick this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and sort of come with something nice, which is true, and that was the original weakness of the original experiment. So they did, first of all, the first thing they did is, they went back to the magazine when, after this article was published, and they said, we want to talk back. We want to talk back. And the magazine said, sorry, we have a new editor, they just want it out of it. It was like too hot. So what did they do? They did a new series of experiments which completely avoided all criticism. Meaning, to give you an example, over here it says 63 things of the Talmud. You can go to any yeshiva, anywhere in the world, walk up to the shelf, you can see how those names are spelled. You can't fiddle with the spelling, there's no wiggle room. They found them encoded in the Torah in a 1 in 4,540,000 chance you just got lucky. Another one, the rabbis in the cities they're from, Harold Gans, the guy's brilliant. He spent his whole life as a senior cryptologist for the U.S. Department of Defense. Originally, he was a tremendous critic. And he said, look, these guys were fiddling around with the names and the dates and the spellings and this and that. Well, all they had to do is add on a third tier of information, the cities these rabbis are from. There's no way it's going to come out if they were fiddling around. He was shocked when he found out it was encoded 1 in 1,048,000 chances he got lucky. What happened was, in 2006, there was a conference of pattern recognition in Hong Kong. They presented 6 papers to the conference. They were all peer-reviewed. They were published in the journal. They were approved. This stuff has been out for years now, and nobody has found any way of finding any faults in any of these experiments. You guys with me? Okay, now, just before, what I want to do is just an introduction. I want to show you guys some codes. But I want to make 2 major points. Point number 1, if you go to Google and Google Bible codes, I guarantee you'll find tons and tons and tons of sites trashing Bible codes. You will notice that either A, they're talking about the original rabbi's experiment. They say there's this wiggle room. Again, you can look for things differently. You can sort of cut and paste and look all around and find all sorts of, come up with something that looks good, which is true. That was the original weakness of that experiment. This stuff has been years now, and nobody's found any way of finding any fault in these experiments. It completely avoids that criticism. Number 2 is there's all sorts of people doing all sorts of things, even the professors don't consider codes. Number 3, there are some failed codes. But again, this stuff has been years, and nobody's found any way of finding any cracks in any of this stuff. Number 2, when this first came out, Christianity and Islam got so excited, and they started looking for codes in their books and presented to the public. They were all checked out, and there's nothing more than you will find on today's front page of Jerusalem Post or the New York Times. Take it. They're not codes. You guys with me? Anyone against me? All right, let's move. I want to show you some codes now. That was just an introduction. We're going to start with the Holocaust. So first of all, we have, now anything I'm showing you here is nothing less than 1 in 1,000 chances you got lucky. Much of it's much higher, much of it, but that's the bar the magazine gave. First of all, in the 9-letter skip, you have Han-Solare, the enemy. Just below you have Nazi at -12. Now again, this is all significant. You'll see soon some skips of Nazi that are much, much smaller, but anything here is nothing less than 1 in 1,000. Over here you have Germania, Germany, it's the way it's spelled in the Talmud, -155. And over here you have Berlin. Berlin is the capital of what country? Germany. So you have Berlin, Germany, Nazi, the enemy. Now what's really interesting about it is, cutting behind the scenes, right through here, is the term Shavar Yehudim, Jewish catastrophe. At a 156 skip between each of these letters, there's 156 letters. What's interesting is this is really a term used only once in all of Tanakh, and it's because behind the scenes right here, Jewish catastrophe. Now, holding on to our Berlin, am I going too quick for you guys? It's okay? Is that all right? Okay. Over here, holding on to our Berlin. So over here we have Nazi, small skip, -1. Over here we have a gentleman by the name of Hitler, we've all heard of him, at a -31. And what they find right above his name, sort of interesting, Russia. What's a Russia? Evil. And then over here we have Hero in the city. So we have Nazi, evil Hitler, city Berlin. Moving on. Again, holding on to our Berlin. What's that?
You go back there.
Go back. Okay? Okay, moving on. So again, holding on to our Berlin, shifting things around. So we have here's Berlin, -4. Over here we have English Nazi. Over here we have a Amalek at a giant skip of 7,450 letters between each of the letters. Does everyone know who Amalek is? Let me flip it on. Does anyone not know? Very important. It's like the Lex Luthor of the Jewish people. It's been this cosmic battle, us versus Amalek, for thousands of years. What do they find right over Amalek? They found the term Slav carrot, which is swastika. They had 3,725 letter skip. Half of this is right on top of it. Slav carrot, swastika. A few more on the Holocaust, and we'll flip over. Big Auschwitz. Auschwitz, you guys probably know, is the principal extermination camp of European Jewry. And you guys been to Auschwitz, Birkenau? A bunch of you guys. Okay, does anyone know who was the guy who got the job of carrying out the final solution? Not the one who invented the idea, but the one who actually, Adolf Eichmann, the guy made his name for himself when Germany annexed Austria. This was before any war started. And all of a sudden, Germany ended up with 108,000 new Jews. They sent this guy in to figure out how to get rid of us. He came up with a policy that was so brilliant, just unleashed unbelievable brutality. And before we got our heads on our shoulders and allowed us to cooperate, the guy threw 120,000 Jews out of Austria when any war started. They said, this guy is unbelievable. He got the job of the final solution, carrying it out. His masterpiece, by the way, was in 1944, when they sent 450,000 Hungarian Jews to Auschwitz in about 8.5 weeks. It was a masterpiece. Over here we have Eichmann. A couple turns on the side, we have Hu, which is murdered. Over here we have Lu, destroyed, and over here, that destroyer, the Yad SS, at the hands of the SS. And these were the guys who were actually hands-on doing the work in the camp. Now, one more in the Holocaust, and I want to switch to a different area. Holding on to Eichmann, we have Eichmann down here. Over here we have gas. Does anyone know, what's the name of the gas they're using in the chambers? Zyklon B. Crystallized prussic acid, when dropped into the atmosphere, instantly becomes lethal. By the way, it was a pesticide. They thought it was hilarious to use a pesticide in the Jews. So they said, computer, found me the word Zyklon B. Peter skipped every 1 letter, 2 letters, 3 letters, 4, 5, 6. Got it? A giant skip, Zyklon B. Going from Eichmann up through gas. Now, I got a question for you guys. If you guys remember the very first slides that I showed you here, it said that everything is in the Torah. Everything is there. If that's the case, can I use the Torah as a crystal ball? Yes or no? Yes, no?
No, because you won't know what it is. What the next
Yeah. Look, it's the year 2000, and I'm sitting and having a cup of coffee, yeah? And all of a sudden I get this brainstorm. Today, I'm going to look of codes of Arabian people flying 747s in the skyscraper. Why not? Yeah. I mean, who even thought of such a thing? But once it's there, you plug it in, and that's what they did, what they found. First of all, they found over here, Hatu mean, twin, -1. Just below that, Bigalo, hours. And just happened cutting through, what did they see? Kuf Gimel Elul, which was September 11th. And also, Yishmael. Who's Yishmael?
Oh.
Now, it's really interesting to know this. Does anyone remember what the estimated death toll of Twin Towers was? It never came up with what's the 2000? It was around, they said, the best they could come up with was about 3,000. They never came up with an accurate number. This area over here is actually talking about the golden calf, where the tribe of Levi rises up and does away with all the bad guys. What does it say here? It says, he fell and fell, Minha'am, the Yomahu, and fell from the Alman that day, about Shoshas feet east, about 3,000 people, which is a death toll, estimated death toll in the Twin Towers. One more on the Twin Towers. Over here we have Matos, which is airplane, minus 39. Coming down this way, you have heat peel, knockdown, 39. Now, what's interesting is just in front of it, Hatumi, almost looks like an arrow going up to the left. That's my imagination. And over here, we have the leg tower. Now, by the way, when the guy who was checking for this code, he was looking for the plural. There are two planes, two towers. He found the singular. He found airplane knockdown. Then he noticed something quite interesting. Right here it says Pamayim. What's Pamayim?
Wow.
Yes. And finally, the maid chum, the dialect. Okay, do you guys remember Gilad Shalit? You guys know? What's that?
Named after.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah,
He's sure you guys.
this poor kid, he was captured by Hamas in Gaza. He was held like underground for 5 years. And there's a lot we didn't know until he was finally freed. But anyways, they plugged him in. Gilad, over here we have Shalit. Over here we have kidnapped. And over here we have Hamas. Now, what's really interesting is, like I said before, a lot we didn't know about this kid until he was released. And he said at the beginning, they're trying to chuck him around from one terrorist group to another. They realized they had good merchandise in their hands, trying to get a little bit of money, trying to offer him off to the highest bidder. I don't think they were successful. But this section here, what's it talking about? It's talking about when, do you guys know Yosef and his brothers, there's a little bit of friction in the family for various reasons. And what they do, they threw him in the pit. They sort of went away, and then the brothers sent him off, Midian traders to Egypt, into slavery, et cetera, et cetera. So that's this area here, and Reuben comes back to try to save Yosef, but they're certainly taken off and sold. Instead of saying, going there, and the other thing, the boy gets on board. It's basically the same storyline. Moving on. Tsunami. Now again, guys, this is a great example of why I can't use the Torah as a crystal ball. I don't think I heard the term tsunami until the original tsunami hit. And then it was all over the newspapers. This isn't the one that hit the Japanese reactor. This one before it, that the Asian basin, Sri Lanka, Goal Harbor, just wiped the whole area out. So how do you look for something if you don't even know the word? But once you know the word, you plug it in. They found Gildalit Tebet, which is when it hit the Asian basin, Sri Lanka, Goal Harbor. Over here you have the Asia in Asia. Over here you have riverboat, Pentagon, continuing on, Nipsu, drowned, and finally the tsunami, So good, how do you look for something if you don't even know the term? Well, once you know, you just plug it in and see how it comes out. Lastly, I don't take any questions, guys. I hope last. You guys remember Hurricane Katrina? Mm-hmm. You know, this was the largest, at the time, it was the largest hurricane ever hit America, third strongest. It had like winds of 175 miles an hour. Like, no things. It was 80% was underwater, in some places like 20 feet, 15 million people displaced, unbelievable disaster. They plugged it in. What they found, so over here we have New, and then Orleans. Orleans did a fairly big skip of 2,527 letters. Over here we have Kuf-based Av, which is when it hit. Over here is more philosophical, and what you want to do with it, commence Av, anger of wrath, and then finally cat rating Av. So guys, at the end of the day, what comes out of this? It's like, you can't use the Torah as a crystal ball, because again, how do you know what terrific event, what tragedy is going to happen next? You don't even know what to look for. Maybe you don't even know the words. And that's the case, what's the point? And I think there is a point. Aside from the fact that, okay, we say it's a blueprint of creation, everything's in there. I think there's another very important point, and that is, if you're living in a world of skepticism, if you're living in a world of scientific methodology, maybe someone's going to show us that apparently we're dealing with a book that doesn't seem to be able to be produced by a human being. Again, chance? Doesn't seem like it. Design? Certainly seems like it. Human design? If that's the case, who wrote the book? Thank you very much, guys.
Wow.
You guys want to hear one more thing, a little more update? Okay, do you guys remember what was that thing called? There's some years ago. Oh yeah, do you guys remember the thing called Corona? Yeah. Okay. So this is an undoctored slide, completely undoctored. But what do we have here? We have Ephratz, which is to break out. Ephratz twice, break out. Over here, Bitsin in China. Over here we have Nagifa's plague. Over here we have Wuhan, which is the place where theoretically it started. And finally we have Corona. Thank you very much.